there. We're glad you could join us on another trip down the donut hole. And today we're going to talk about cyber security, or should I say cyber insecurity.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. Insecurity. I think everybody has the sense that the whole computer universe is a dangerous place. And you know what? That's not wrong. Go with that.
Go with your gut.
Go with your gut. Also, be very careful what you open up. Any README messages that come up on your computers, especially if you're running a business or you work for an important infrastructure business, then just be really, really careful with that, because there has been a new cyber attack hitting apparently dozens at least big corporations. And they have some sort of a joking attitude, mocking Elon Musk's Doge imperatives of give me 5 bullet points of what you worked on last week, or you owe me $1 trillion. So you want to laugh because the hubris of that is off the charts. You want to laugh and think, oh boy, this is like a war of the Titans. But
I mean, did he ever say that? And the ones that actually came from him?
Oh, yes. Oh, and he does it at all of his companies, too. So that's just the way he does it, because basically it's a management style that makes people feel like at any minute they could get the axe on their employment contract. And if so, they have to try harder, work harder, put up with more stuff. And so it's a style. Is it good in the long run? I don't know. I bet the churn is pretty high in most of his organizations or anything that he's connected with. And certainly in the government, I know there's a lot of people that are really tired of that. And reports are that he's only going to stay until May, which would only be another week or so. However, that was the plan all along. He was only supposed to be there for, I think, 130 days. And he's been able to do a fair bit of damage in 130 days, to the point where these cyber attack things are pointing to really serious breaches of our government organizations. And now, since the indiscriminate tsunami of activity from him and what people are calling the Doge goons, now we have to assume that virtually every agency in the United States government has been compromised. Think about that. That means that we are not in a position to just resume business as usual. If we can kind of get things back under control, we can't do that because there has been no tracking. All the tracking has been turned off on Doge's activities. So we don't know really where they were, what they took. We do know that there is a whistleblower who said that they transferred data from inside government computers to another site, another computer receptacle, but we don't know where. Now, as a central part of the world's security in terms of intelligence, having some unvetted, indiscriminate weasel in all of our systems, that is really scary because everything is compromised. We can't assume that anything is safe, and now all of that needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. And I'm not sure that under the current leadership that we're in any position to do that. And so I'm rattled to my timbers, and I don't think the whole 5 bullet points thing is funny. There's also references to our old buddy Big Balls in these cyber attacks.
Again, I'm glad you said that, not me.
Yeah. Well, if that's your name, if that's what you're calling yourself. But that guy has ties to cyber criminal activity previously.
It takes a thief, right? The old
Right.
saying, to catch
Well,
one.
and also because they're very agile with computers, it doesn't take long. I know I can goof up my computer with an inadvertent button push often, and my stuff I'm working on just disappears, and I get very, very afraid.
Some of that is your aura, though. I think it's you don't even have to touch it
An aura
sometimes.
of
If you're within
computer
1 foot.
incompetence. So with me, basically even thinking that I can sound the alarm about how we need to really focus much more intently on cybersecurity, it's almost laughable because I'm not the person for that.
You might be, though, because maybe you could get a job with some of these hackers because you just sort of disrupt systems in your proximity.
Yeah, but they would like it to be a useful disruption, I'm sure, something that they could recover from.
No, that's
and I could finish it off.
some of the end games for some of these hackers are just to be generally disruptive, and especially when you're talking about geopolitical conflicts and things. That's what they're all about, really.
Oh. Some of these are critical systems. I mean, there have been businesses, infrastructure. I know not long ago there was a power outage that lasted for a long time, and that was due to hackers. So what are we supposed to do? I mean, is it going to be now up to cities to put in their own backup systems?
Well, that's the thing. As you know well, I preach that all the time.
Yes.
That we need a backup system there. You think about the fact that how much depends on the internet, and we all depend on it for even psychological reasons. What I mean by that is that if it all of a sudden disappears, people are going to, oh my gosh, you see it a little bit when you lose power and people are kind of freaking out a little bit. Mm-hmm. And trying to call the electric company and all that every few seconds to see, and they can't get through.
Or if your bank doesn't update your account for some reason, you have a deposit that doesn't get credited on time, and then that creates this domino effect that can bring an awful lot of stress to you as you try to unravel that, and then you have to wait for things to update or for a correction to go through, and then you have to prove you're not a robot or some malicious player, and it's a real snarl.
In hackers, where disruption is the goal, that is another word for that. That's called psyops.
Yeah.
And that's a real fighting tool. It really is. It's I've heard it said that we've been fighting a world war for a long time now on the internet.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of governments who would prefer to destabilize their geopolitical adversaries.
Yep,
and
exactly.
The best way to do that is to sow confusion because no group divided among itself can survive, really. And in this country, I mean, there's been talk of certainly Russian incursions in all kinds of forums that influence public opinion one way or another and foment any discord among the populace. Because united, we're in good shape. Divided, not so much. Because it's hard to tell who's friend and who is foe, and we don't seem to be hitched to the same wagon. And so those are all issues that have to be taken into consideration. Now, I know one of the funding cuts was for the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposure Program, which was our government's analysis of weak points in our cyber infrastructure, both in terms of security and in terms of functionality, and what we need societally to carry on a reasonable lifestyle. And so the funding was cut for that, and there was an absolute hue and cry. So my understanding is that it was restored this morning. And there's a lot of commentary that said that that's a bad way to proceed when you're cutting. Cutting makes sense. Nobody's arguing with that. The government has a way of getting bloated. But if what looks like bloat from the outside is actually a functional necessity to address problems that are persistent or foreseeable issues that might come up as we progress, then that isn't bloat. It may look like it from the outside, it may smell like it, and maybe there are certain things that don't get used every day, but they have to be a hot standby. It's like having a generator. It's in the way, in the garage, all the time. You could use that space differently and more favorably for everyday usage, but you don't dare bury that thing too deep or fail to maintain it or be ready in case you need it. Because if you need it now, and it needs to be in repair. And it's the same thing, I would imagine, with government,
Ideally, yes.
But
they're far from the ideal, I expect.
Oh, yeah, and I think getting further from it because all of this has happened too fast and there has not been a step-by-step organizational plan that got looked at by more than a few people. It was just, let's go, and, a search and destroy mission is what it feels like. I mean, the image of the chainsaw is, I think, accurate. That's how it feels. And I don't think that that's good in the case of running of a government.
No, I wouldn't think so.
In fact,
just the optics of something like that gives you a whole picture of where their head's at.
Yeah, that might be good if you have like a overgrown patch of ground on your land and you want to build a gazebo, and the guys come in and they got their chainsaws and you're thinking, yay, they're here and this is going to get cleaned up. But when it comes to things as intricate as government systems and as expensive to fix as government systems, I hardly think a chainsaw is the way we want to go. We want a scalpel more than that. I understand, on the heels of all of this, that there have been more travel advisories to potential tourists thinking that they might want to come and visit the United States. And pretty much everybody has advised against visiting here. Or at least if you are going to visit here, to be aware of certain issues. And just for what it's worth, our high crime, terrorism, immigration policies, scrutiny at the borders, including invasive searches of phones and personal belongings without specific provocation or justification for that. And the idea that there are extremist groups targeting certain populations. The state of Florida is particularly flagged for people, of color, for LGBTQ.
That's what I was just
people.
going to ask. Is there statistics that show that? That depends on where you're coming in from, and sadly, the color of your skin and all that.
I saw something this morning just in passing that Florida is particularly flagged, and that there's legal repercussions in the United States for exercise of rights listed in our Constitution to free speech, freedom of assembly, that sort of thing. They say speaking with an accent is enough to get you targeted by groups in this country.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Now, it seems to me you add the lack of tourism, the lack of a welcoming demeanor to the effect of tariffs, to the expulsion of people rightly and wrongly, to the curtailment of scientific research and all the people associated with that who were drawn here from around the globe to study. It's breathtaking in its scope. It's just breathtaking in how isolated in 100 days we've become. And I think, for me personally, I always thought, that there were so many pillars of this country that you could just count on, that the wheels of government turn slowly, and that offered some level of protection. But apparently that was naivete on my part, because it doesn't seem to be that way. It seems like we have isolated ourselves completely. And that is nothing but scary.
The old exceptionalism thing again.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the tide is changing. I think more and more people who thought that draining the swamp meant something different than this, I think they're having some buyer's remorse, because the poll numbers keep plummeting in terms of favorability and approval and all of that. And I think President Trump he's not unclued up about favorability. He understands ratings. He talks a lot about ratings. Mostly he means in terms of television viewership, like back in the old days when he was doing his reality show. But he knows the importance of public opinion, and so I expect that we'll see a very big correction very quickly, because, the numbers are going down so fast, he can't absorb much more and recover.
That's true.
So
that's odd to think about somebody's ego being a help in terms of.
Oh, well, it isn't even just an ego. That's a reality check. When you talk about reality TV, and it goes over well, as long as people have the sense that they like what they see, that the players are attractive, et cetera, et cetera. But this, I think, the cuts have been so sweeping that almost no household has escaped some sort of detriment from those decisions. And so realizing that now, that this isn't going to be just the bad people or just the people we don't like or wish weren't here, that those are going to be the only ones who will suffer from a massive, beyond massive, overhaul of our government. Now that reality is setting in, I think people are changing their mind to a high degree on how to proceed with this. The core plan sounded good. Still does. You say, okay, let me see. But bring the data. Like you've always said, show me. What's the bloat here? Show me what the alternative is. What are you going to do? And just squishing agencies together under single banners, I don't know that that's going to fix a lot of stuff. If it's just compounding backlogs and gaps in what is being addressed in terms of running and administrating a country as large and
then you have the mentoring
diverse
problem that we talked about,
yeah,
with newbies coming into certain positions, and if you're kind of squeezing one committee into another or one branch of government, whatever it is that they do, there's going to be people there that are told to take on additional duties that they really don't have any experience with.
Right. So that means nobody knows what they're doing. If you squeeze agencies together and you got newbies at the helm and you get rid of all of the top tier people who might have something to say against what you're doing, who might be the voice of reason and caution and say, hey, you can't do that. Here's why. And your response is, get out of here. You're gone. Pack up. We'll show you the door. That is not going to work. And those kinds of things take a long time to fix. Now, in terms of our national security, I believe we have never been more vulnerable than we are now at this moment.
It could well be.
If we don't know enough to safeguard attack plans, not just war plans, but attack plans, specific attack plans. And we're doubling down on continuing patterns that have drawn a lot of criticism, then that's not good. Those are not good signs. They wouldn't be a good sign at your local club or your business or a restaurant. Those are not good signs. If you just repeat the same patterns that, were unacceptable a week ago, and you do it again, and you think there's going to be a different response to it. That's not okay, especially at those levels. So a lot of people are saying that they're missing Joe Biden, and they're calling him Sleepy Joe. We're missing Sleepy Joe because at least we didn't have to get up in the morning and have the daily round of whiplash, meaning things got cut last week and today they're going to be restored, or this whole group of people got fired last week, but the court says they have to be rehired rather. And so back and forth and back and forth. And it's hard to keep up. And in that confusion, that breeds more stress and more worry. And the worst part is more vulnerability, because nobody seems to know what's going on from beginning to end. So the press, a lot of the big players, are friends, good friends. We saw them all at the inauguration. We saw Twitter there. We saw Facebook there. We saw Washington Post there. We saw Google there. We saw all the big players in the best seats in the House at the inauguration. And so we have to wonder how much in-depth, independent-minded reporting is actually getting done. Because it shouldn't be people like you and I, senior citizens, sitting out in the countryside, looking at all of this stuff with a very skeptical eye. That should be voiced everywhere. And I don't think it's being treated as seriously. Certainly what happened with these cyber attacks. This whistleblower guy, apparently there was a photograph taped to the door of his office showing him walking his dog in front of his apartment house that he's only lived in for 2 months, hadn't published the address of it for obvious reasons. The only place he registered that address was at his workplace in our government. So someone inside the government knew where to find him, took his picture with a drone as he was just walking his little dog up the street, and basically tried to intimidate him to keep quiet.
So we are watching you.
We are watching you.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a single reason why any government workers inside any of the inner workings of the computer systems, the network, the huge network that is the United States, why it would be okay for them to turn off any kind of tracking of what they're doing. The tracking stays on, always. And there should be third parties in there documenting, okay, what are you doing now? Why are you doing that? And then signing off. People who know, not just, people like me, Grandma Jones, sitting there. Not people like me, but people who can really understand, what are you doing now and why?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's always a spot for somebody from just the regular population who are living in the trenches, so to speak, to get their perspective on. They may not be technical, but the practicality of the information that somebody like that could provide is important.
I think it is. But secondarily, if you have people in your computer systems in secure places, ultra secure places, you want a computer nerd. You want a nerd or a geek sitting there who can say, wait a minute, my job is to make sure that this is the gate. You don't pass this. And because we're not screened. Who are these people? And I am very concerned about that, because the fallout from this, on the heels of this cyber attack, and it's supposedly a joke, the bullet point thing and the big balls thing, I'm thinking that's not going to set well with people. And this whistleblower account of them turning off tracking systems, blah, 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 where did that information get sent? And is it indeed part of this cyber attack? Because this person has a bad record, a bad resume. So how are they there? In the fallout from that, I think a lot of staunch supporters of this are going to take a step back because they're reasonable people. These are a lot of these career politicians. We say that with some sort of disdain, a career politician. But you get where you get by understanding
How to get voted and how to
get
raise money.
voted,
It's basically what
how
they
to
know.
raise money and how to network with certain people.
Not for the right reasons, clearly.
Yeah, but truly not. It's to keep yourself in there, usually. But you can't. It can't be completely divorced from what's happening back home, from the ones.
It shouldn't
what
be. It's a
sent
better
ya.
way to describe it. It happens all the time, more often than not, I'm afraid. But it shouldn't be. That's true.
Oh, it's like, when they say that people get promoted and promoted until they finally reach a level of incompetence. They deserve those early promotions because they've earned it, they know the job, they can contribute at the next level. And then finally, at some point, they get hired one step too high. And then that's where they stay. And so there was just too many variables with this. And when you build walls around your country, when you stifle diverse voices, then you become isolated yourself. And it's, walls keep people in as well as keeping people out. And I think understanding it, everything has two sides. So
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's a continual problem, and it is getting worse. You see, I think a statistic I saw not too long ago that in the last 3 years, there's been a 7-fold increase in hacking attempts for all sorts of reasons, but especially in the geopolitical realm. Well, like I said earlier, their goal is destabilization.
yeah. I know that most cities now are looking at their infrastructure because of weather. I mean, it isn't always an attack. That's an increasingly likely possibility.
It's an attack by the weather.
Yeah.
And then there you go down the donut
by
hole
Mama Nature.
about who's controlling the weather, maybe.
I always remember, the rags at the checkout counters in the grocery store. Mm-hmm. There was always a front page thing about weather machines.
Yeah.
And that.
Well, there's some credible belief that there has been such activity. In fact, you were a big fan of one of the quote-unquote possible conspiracy theories about that.
Well, I was.
About a big installation in Alaska, I think it was.
Yeah. What was that? What was it called?
HARP.
Oh, yeah, the HARP thing.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a surveillance over-the-horizon surveillance mechanism or something?
Yeah, well, the official stories always deviate significantly from the actual fact, but there were some who believed that it was to try and control the weather, specifically in certain areas. Again, for just
for warfare.
Everyday nuisance, but just for destabilization purposes.
Wow. Yeah.
And given the weather in the U.S., especially in the interior, from California across the whole interior of the U.S., with the weather and the violence of all of it all the time, it seems like maybe if that was an effort, it has backfired. And it's been wrought upon ourselves in this country with the tornadoes and all the other stuff that's been going on.
Yeah. Well, I'm big on trying to keep my phone charged up, especially if you see that you've got some weather patterns in the forecast that look like they might be a bit much. Then keep your phone charged up. Get some cash. It's important to get cash because even at the local grocery store, the computers won't work if there's no power. I mean, some of them, the big chains probably have generators, but they only last so long.
Well, that's sort of a mental exercise, too, that will work in terms of what we're talking about here. If the internet is destabilized or completely unavailable at some point to prevent panic, you're prepared just as if you were going to face a big, severe storm system.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I do not want to get rid of my gas stove. I know they keep saying, "Oh, the air quality in your home is much worse if you have a gas stove," but I'm not doing a whole bunch of.
Only if you don't light it.
Yeah, but
That's really bad. Yeah. I
yeah, well,
admit
I
that.
don't do that. But I keep that because I think that's part of a backup plan for how to cook,
That's
or at
great,
least,
yeah.
even if you're not going to be cooking a meal, but to be able to make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea in a power outage or in any kind of a stressful situation, to me, it makes all the difference, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. And we've lived through a few of those. We've lived out in some rural areas where the power would go down routinely, or the phone line or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you're prepared, you don't worry about it.
You
as much,
write
and
it
you know
out.
that
You
you're
might
ready.
not love it, but
Yeah. But that's sort of the message that part of what we'd like to convey out there, and having lived through some of the stuff ourselves, and knowing what our parents had to live
Yeah.
through. We all lived most of our lives without the internet, and that's that thought of that by the younger generation is shockingly scary. For them. What? You had no GPS, you had no internet. Oh my gosh, how did you do that?
well,
But we need to be prepared for that again, I think, because all this hacking going on.
no, that's exactly right. I think there's a certain, I'll call it flat out security in looking at the person you're doing business with. I think the smaller regional banks, that makes me happy. It feels like it's,
The credit unions in certain areas, yeah.
that they're more controlled, that they're not as vulnerable to some bad decision making on the top of by some executive in the top office. And I think it's not bulletproof for sure, because mistakes can be made by anybody. But it seems like the fallout from it would be less.
The other factor that is going to be and is a real concern is AI. They call it generative AI, where it's more able to repair itself and figure out other ways to accomplish its intended goal completely independently. And the amount of extra danger from the internet really being compromised in a big way for people who have been highly trained in cybersecurity, they can't keep up with that. They can't keep up with a generative AI engine that
Like
is
a malware?
constantly trying to figure out a way to. It's basically it's a game back and forth. It's a sword fight basically. It's but it's because it's able to generate and respond to the defenses that well-trained cybersecurity people have put in front of it. It's becoming an increasing challenge, which means that you probably it's going to run away train at some point, and it will result in a loss of service at the very least, and utilities and things that depend on the internet and all that sort of thing. It is a concern. I mean, not to panic about, but I think people do need to get into the mindset once in a while about what would I do if I
didn't
have
this.
it. The way people, freak out too when they just break their phone or they lose their phone or something, In the earlier days when the internet began to offer things like cloud storage, as a backup, but people now have basically that's their primary source of storing their information, and that's
Right.
a mistake. You keep it. I mean, keep using a cloud service if you want, but you should back up. Now it's just the other way around. You should back up your cloud storage with some local SD cards or something like that on your devices, so that if you don't have connection to the internet, you'll have a backup copy on your device.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think just back up everything that you can, have things in a reasonable place that you can access them. Getting organized, it comes down to that. In terms of even just food, make sure you have some canned goods that you keep. And I'm not talking about hoarding things. I'm not talking about going and clearing the shelves at Walmart in some kind of a panic. But I am saying, for us, for instance, I like to buy the things of paper towels and the multi-packs, paper towels, bath tissue, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I buy in the big packs. So
There is a government website. I think it's ready.gov, and there's a lot of information about that. And, their spin is more like, natural disasters and that sort of thing. But it applies if you lose connection to the internet, and it affects utilities and things like that. We did find a way, actually, to power our water pump that's in a deep well from DC, which is easier to do when you don't have the grid available. It's easier to do. It's lower voltage, and you can do it with solar panels or wind generator or something like that. So, because if you think about it, if you lose power, in a lot of cases, you're going to lose your water as well.
Mm-hmm. So,
and that's even true with the municipal systems, because obviously they depend on the grid to run their pumps that feed a whole community or a town. And maybe some of them probably do have backup generators and all that, but there's a limited amount of time you can run a generator because it needs fuel.
Yeah. I mean, they're running gas and things like that. But no, I think every household, if you can plan for a few things, like instead of waiting until you've opened and used the last can of baked beans, keep a couple extra. When you replace those, buy one more, buy two more. So it's not a big hit. You're not having to spend great big amounts of money, and store them.
When you're down to that last can of okra.
Yeah, we always used to joke that it was the okra, especially up north, because it's not a thing out there as much as down here. And we used to say that was the only thing on the shelves when the power went out or the stores were closed because of a weather event. Sometimes with, especially winter, especially the icy rains and things like that, everything just shuts down because they don't want people on the roads for sensible reasons.
Well, we've lived it a lot up north, but also in Florida with hurricane alerts and that sort of thing. And you do go to a few times we've gone to the grocery store, and it really has been devoid of all bread things, water, all the usual things that people
You
want.
did something that was really smart. When we came down here, we were scheduled to go house hunting, actually. And we came down here, and the hurricane was not supposed to track where it tracked, but we were down in the Orlando area. And we went over to a Publix, and pretty much it was empty. They had brought in extra water and things like that for people to stock up with. So we had a hotel room. It was ground floor. And we said, we better lay in some supplies because we don't know how this is going to go. Mm-hmm. So they brought sandbags around to all the hotels that were ground floor so that you could block up your doorway. Anyway, the bread was gone. The rolls were
nothing
gone.
Left.
There was not one thing.
Hamburger buns, the white foam loaf bread, like I like to call it, white foam bread, even all of that's gone. Everything was gone.
But Dave got us some of that German bread from the international aisle.
Yeah, I happen to think about the international aisle, and they have some pumpernickel, that's has long
really
shelf
good.
life, and nobody had touched that. They'd say, "Oh, I don't like that," or they forgot to look for that.
Or they just have never tried it.
Yeah.
You should try it sometime because it keeps very, very well. It's not a big loaf, but that kind of bread is denser. Mm-hmm. So it fills you up quicker and holds you longer. Right. So that's a really good thing to have. Now, I'm not, sure how long you can store that on the shelf, but it's shelf stable for a while.
A lot longer than the bread in the aisle.
Well, I think a lot of it has molasses.
And certainly a lot more than the bread in the bakery area.
Oh, yeah. So that's a really good thing to remember, that's an opportunity. And just a little of that with some nice butter on it or some nut butter or something like that. You don't have to cook it. It tastes good and it'll hold you for a while. So those are all considerations. And I've always kept good old Spam. I know the people either love it.
Spam.
People either love it or they hate it. I'm one of those people that happens to love it, but I don't eat it very often.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, because you're one of those people that pretty much doesn't love it.
Oof. I don't. Another one of those things we have no idea what's in there.
We don't care.
like a hot dog.
We don't care. But that's a good thing to keep on the shelf. Why I like that, too, is the cans aren't very big. They don't take up a lot of your shelf space. You can stack up 2 or 3 of them, and it's a little meat. You're not going to feast on it, but it's a little protein if you have to go a few days with whatever supply of groceries you have at the time of some sort of weather situation that gets out of hand. So those are all important things. Certainly having some jugs of drinking water on hand, very important. And what else?
All the
batteries.
All the basics. But I do think, actually, that's very strange to think about, but I think people will be most upset by not being able to use their devices. I'll pivot back to that. And I did notice a trend. It was last year that I had to get another phone. And I noticed something that I had not really realized until the time when I needed to shop for one. And that is the trend seems to be away from the ability to have an external SD card in your device. And I'm thinking, is this by design? Or it's probably just a capitalistic thing, saying, well, if you want more memory, then you have to buy this other model thing, possibly. But I'm thinking... that's not good, because what I like to say, too, in addition to what I just talked about, backing up your cloud, is to also back up the stuff that you like to watch. Just make a huge library of videos that you like, music that you like, and educational stuff that you can actually download the entirety of Wikipedia on your device. A lot of people don't know this.
On your device?
On your device. As long as you have enough memory, but that's the problem.
But you got to keep it charged. Those little solar panels, like you talk about, they're the size of a notebook page.
That's right.
A lined notebook paper.
So if you had that, and all this hacking did result in a lack of connection to the internet for an extended period of time, instead of freaking out, you could still use your device, and you would have a lot of the things that you normally watch on there. Obviously, you're not going to back up YouTube. Nobody can do that, except for Google. And I don't know how they do that. But anyway, it helps keep a sense of normalcy when you have a power outage or you have no internet connection. In fact, a lot of people don't have a way of powering their internet modem either if you have a power outage. Even though the internet might still be there,
right?
If you don't have a way to power your modem and your connection to the internet, then it's out for you. So all these things should be thought about. And these are things I find comforting, because there are things that we can do, our normal person in the street, so to speak, can do to keep ourselves feeling somewhat normal in some crises like that.
Yeah. Your ability to have a cup of tea while you're watching one of your shows that you archived, that all helps. Having some water that you can flush your toilet. Those big Culligan bottles or whatever the company is, save those. Use the water for, your normal drinking purposes, but save those bottles and fill them so that you can use those in an emergency every once in a while. You're not going to get the flush levels that you're used to, but judiciously every little while, if you have some of that water stored, you can use that to clear your toilets and stuff. And that helps. All of these little things in an emergency, these are things that we can do, assuming you still have a house. So there's so much. We see all of this on the news, and it's quite frightening. But even so, we are very blessed. And we need to
There's
stay focused.
a silver lining there.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah, there is. We just need to keep our eye on that, control what we can control, make some backup plans, and don't freak out. Don't do it yourself. Don't let your people. Just say, we'll get through it. We always do. And it may be a bit of a slog. Be prepared for that. But keep your eye on your blessings, for there are many.